Welcome to the second part of American imperialism. Last time we looked at the rise of America as an imperial power. We looked at why the United States looked to expand beyond its borders for markets, to sell its goods, for natural resources, to feed its factories, to compete with Europeans, and for the civilizing mission, spreading American ideas and culture to other parts of the world. It was after the Spanish-American War that America took possession of its first colonies, the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Today we will consider the arguments against imperialism and look at the American experience in Cuba and the Philippines, the expansion of American influence in China, and American relations in Latin America. It's American Imperialism, Part 2. Not everyone liked the idea of American expansion. Congress only ratified the Treaty of Paris at the end of the Spanish-American War by 2 votes, and the American Anti-Imperialist League opposed American involvement overseas for several reasons. They argued that colonizing other countries went against America's founding principles. They asked, was America not a victim of British imperialism? Was America not founded on the principles of liberty, equality, and self-government? They argued that America would lose the moral high ground when they start to colonize other countries. They also argued that imperialism violated Washington's farewell address, which said that Americans should only have economic relationships with other countries. They argued that trade did not require the use of troops and getting involved in the politics of other countries, which leads to the last point, which said that getting involved would lead to conflict in distant lands and did not have a direct impact on the United States. The United States would learn this very quickly in the Philippines. And lastly, people like Booker T. Washington said that the United States should worry about its own problems at home before worrying about the problems in other countries, like the issue of race. The United States helped Cuba earn its independence from Spain in the Spanish-American War, but did not leave Cuba to do what it wanted. As Cuba formed a new government, the United States pushed it to pass the Platt Amendment, which gave the United States influence in the affairs of the island. It said that Cuba could not make treaties with other countries that allowed them to control Cuban territory. It said that Cuba could not go into debt, and it said the United States reserved the right to intervene if it believed Cuban independence was being threatened. The United States could also use Cuban land for naval facilities. One of these areas, Guantanamo Bay, is a source of tension today in America's ongoing war on terrorism. Cuba was a protectorate of the United States, meaning that the United States would reserve the right to protect its interests on the island. After fighting alongside the United States to get Spain out of the Philippines, Filipinos believed they would be granted their independence. When the United States decided to retain the islands as a colony, Emilio Aguinaldo led an independence movement against the United States. The fighting in the Philippines was brutal. Americans were ravaged by disease and struggled with the guerrilla tactics used by the Aguinaldo's forces. Americans forced Filipinos to live in poor conditions and used what they called the water cure to get information out of people. The image shows this process, which today is known as waterboarding. Some people call this a form of torture. Other people call it enhanced interrogation. And it is another source of conflict in America's current war on terrorism. The United States was learning the lesson that empire was not easy. This was the same lesson learned by the British in North America in the 1770s. Some said American actions were similar to those of the Spain before them in the Philippines. Ultimately, 70,000 U.S. troops were used to put down Aguinaldo's forces in a conflict that lasted 3 years, cost the loss of up to 20,000 Filipino combatants, and cost the United States $400 million. Some sources say that as many as 200,000 citizens of the Philippines were killed as a result of the war. The Philippines would remain an American colony until after World War II. At the end of the 19th century, China was falling under the influence of imperial powers as a result of political corruption. Countries like Germany, Italy, England, Russia, and Japan carved out spheres of influence in China where they could trade their goods. The United States feared that it would lose access to these lucrative markets, and in response, American Secretary of State John Hay issued the open door notes to these countries, calling for equal trading rights for all imperial powers in China. This led to America's open door policy, which said all countries would have equal trading rights in China so as to avoid one country dominating the Chinese market. Hay said that the Chinese sovereignty had to be respected in order to ensure everyone's trade opportunities. This door would remain open until the outbreak of World War II. It also increased the role of the United States in Asia and laid the foundation for the United States' current economic ties to China, which is a topic of much conversation. Before getting into Latin America, it's worth reviewing the Monroe Doctrine, which was the American response to European attempts to recolonize parts of Latin America after the fall of Napoleon. The map here shows the areas that make up Latin America. The doctrine told Europeans that they could no longer colonize Latin America. It pointed out the differences between the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere with regards to government. It said that the United States would take it as a threat if Europeans tried to impose their system of government in Latin America. And it said that the United States would not interfere with existing European colonies. This doctrine had little impact when it was issued, but it would become the centerpiece of American foreign policy at the turn of the 20th century and something that Theodore Roosevelt would expand upon in Latin America. Theodore Roosevelt wanted a canal that linked the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean to allow easier access between its colonies in the Caribbean and the Pacific. The Isthmus of Panama was identified as the best location for this canal, and Panama, a Colombian province, would soon find itself at the center of American imperial ambitions. Roosevelt wanted this canal to be constructed as soon as possible. The Hay-Huron Treaty said the United States would pay Colombia $10 million initially and $250,000 a year for 99 years for access to a canal zone in the Colombian province of Panama. The government in Colombia turned down the offer to hold out for a better deal. The United States then supported a revolution in Panama against the Colombian government. And when the Panamanians gained their independence from Colombia, the United States quickly recognized the new Republic of Panama. And not surprisingly, one of the first things this new republic did was agree to the Hay-Bonaventura Treaty in 1903. This treaty granted the United States access to the canal zone for $10 million initially and $250,000 a year forever. The Panama Canal was completed in 1914, and the Americans now had their canal to have easier access between their colonies in the Caribbean and colonies in the Pacific. The canal zone would be controlled by the Americans until 1979, when both the Americans and Panamanians would have joint control of it. And on December 31st, 1999, the United States formally handed over the Panama Canal to the Panamanians. One of the major issues facing Latin American countries in the 20th century was debt owed to European countries. The British sent warships to Venezuela in 1902 to force that country to pay its debts. And when other countries threatened to do the same in Santo Domingo in 1904, Roosevelt claimed that this would violate the Monroe Doctrine and offered a solution. Roosevelt's solution, the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, said that the United States would intervene on behalf of Europeans to force these countries to pay their debts. And over the next 20 years, the United States sent gunboats to places like Cuba, Panama, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, and Haiti under the auspices of the Roosevelt Corollary. Europeans were fond of this policy, but many in Latin America did not appreciate the involvement of the United States in their affairs. Let's close the show by considering William Howard Taft's dollar diplomacy. Roosevelt sought to expand American influence in the world when needed, which was exhibited by his Roosevelt Corollary, which marked a major change in American foreign policy. His successor, William Howard Taft, was more focused on expanding American business. He believed that the expansion of American investment in Latin America would lead to political stability in that part of the world. Taft's policy was known as dollar diplomacy. It urged American businesses to invest in Latin America with a promise that the United States would step in to protect these investments if they were ever to be threatened. The charts show how much the United States invested in Latin America, almost twice as much as any other part of the world at the time. We will look at the United States jumping into European affairs next time, and until then, good night, Albuquerque.